put her on the treadmill at the gym.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys for attending today. My name is Christiane Warlick, and I am the Social Work Student Association Secretary. And you have joined us for our session on diversity and tribal service. Sorry. If you need CEUs, I need you to put your name in the chat. And then also towards the end, I'm going to put a link in the chat for a survey that you will need to do if you want to get CEUs. If you've done one of these today and you've already done that survey, then you don't need to do it again. Also, I will be keeping an eye on the chat. If you have any questions, you can put them in there and I will make sure that they get answered. All right, I'm not sure. We have Dr. Byers and we have Dallas Pettigrew. I'm guessing Dallas is going to start.
Oh.
I think actually Dr. Byers may start.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dr. Byers.
I got to get in the car line and pick up my kid.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have confirmed this. Dr. Byers is going to start for us. Dr. Byers, will you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. My name is Lisa Byers. I am Cherokee from this state, actually grew up in North Tulsa and now live in Owasso. And so I'm very happy to be here today with you. I know many of you as I was looking at the names and the pictures. So it's good to see some of you again. Some of you took the courses that are part of the graduate certificate in social work with American Indians. So it's good to see those faces again. And maybe if I don't know you, you'll be interested in taking the core courses for that certificate. Because as you can see here, these are all of the tribes that are here in Oklahoma. So we have 38 sovereign tribes. And each of those different colors highlights the diversity of those tribal nations. If someone you're serving is enrolled in one of these tribes, you can't determine what services are available for one tribe in terms of it fitting the rest of them. Each of these tribes have their own government. They decide what services they will offer. And so you have to contact the tribe to see what is being offered, including cultural programming. If someone wants to increase their connection to their tribe,
This is a nice one. I hope they send
one you're going to have to contact to find out. And so we are unique. We are special. It's quite a gift to have all of these tribal nations here. I always like to highlight these. I know the map is kind of fuzzy. It came from the American Indian Cultural Center Museum, but you can definitely make out the outline of Oklahoma and then all the different places that tribes that are located here came from. The majority of tribes were relocated from other areas. Oftentimes when you look up tribes in Oklahoma, they'll start with the removal, but that's not the origin for these tribal nations. So I'd encourage you to go to the tribal website and find additional information. And then what's often forgotten is that there were tribes here before the removal. And so we want to honor those tribes that were here, their lands, and not get their story lost as we focus on the horrific events that were involved with removal. That's what I wanted to share in terms of the diversity. And from my time, I have another PowerPoint. I just can't resist doing the PowerPoint. If I'm able to find it. I don't have much time, so I'm going to start talking as I look for it. One thing I wanted to mention and share, another type of diversity, is ethnic identity. And so, can everybody see that PowerPoint? What it is and what it isn't. And so I highlighted this. You have, for example, you're in an agency, and even if you're in a tribal agency, you get an intake form that has somebody has checked American Indian, Alaska Native. So what does that tell you? It doesn't tell you very much. Identifying oneself is one aspect of ethnic identity, but it's not the only one. And so that's the difference between ethnic identity and checking the box. And so you can't make assumptions based on this. You can't make leaps like, oh, well, this client will not want to look me in the eye. This client will be part of a traditional, spiritual tribal group. You just can't. And that's where we're very skilled at talking to people and understanding where they're coming from. Here's some of the elements of ethnic identity. It's not just checking the box. It also includes a sense of yourself as a member of, in this case, that tribal group. It's a dynamic understanding of yourself and your ethnic background. And it can change. That's what makes it difficult. And then here's just the definition for ethnic group. And I can share this after. So what distinguishes ethnic identity versus a concept like acculturation? Well, the defining element is you're focusing on a person's subjective feelings about their ethnicity. My mother always claimed she was Cherokee. She was full blood. She knew her clan. But there was a little bit of shame tied up in that. She was a boarding school survivor. And so, again, she checked the box, but in terms of her level of pride, in terms of her level of coping, it won't tell you very much. And it's a source of a lot of pain for people who feel like they've lost a connection to their culture. I know it was a source of pain for my mother. She always wanted to speak Cherokee, but her father and her mother fought. And my grandfather said they don't need to learn it. They're growing up in a white world and it's going to hurt them. So these are just a number of different reactions that people can have when they think about their ethnic identity. Okay, here's where it gets 1, 2, 3. So ethnic identity, here are the 3 aspects. You have ethnic self-identification, and I've altered this for tribal people so people can be tribally enrolled, have citizenship with their tribe. This is actually a Bureau of Indian Affairs card. Some people may have this, but they may not have, enrollment with the tribe per se, because there's different qualifications. As I mentioned, each tribe has its own government and they decide their citizenship requirements. And so I've known people that have their blood quantum defined, but they don't meet the blood quantum requirements to be enrolled with a specific tribal nation. So that's just one form. People can check the box and not be enrolled. There are certain reasons why that takes place, and it's up to us to be sensitive to that and understand. But if they're not enrolled with the tribe, they're not going to be eligible for tribal services typically. So you have the self-identification, but then the other aspect is a sense of belonging to an ethnic group and feelings about that membership. For me, I used powwowing as the defining characteristic of my culture and grew up a long time really sad that we never were a powwow family. And so for me, I clung to that as a proof of my identity, and I felt very badly that we didn't. And so that's just the sense. If that had taken place, I probably would have talked about a strong sense of belonging and a lot of happiness. But then as I grew older, I realized, thankfully, there's more than one way, and that powwowing isn't the only way. You may encounter people that have different senses of if you speak the language or if you don't, then you may be more connected or you may not. I've heard some arguments about that within some of my tribal groupings I'm in. And then ethnic identity development. And that's the extent that the feelings and the understandings have been consciously examined and issues surrounding ethnicity have been resolved. So you have an achieved ethnic identity. As I mentioned, the process I went through. So I would put myself here in terms of my ethnic identity about development. These things have been resolved. I've embraced the historical reasons and the family reasons why certain things weren't carried on. And so it's a very good place to be. And you will get people at different spots on this. And I think it's up to us to get them the resources, the cultural connections that will help them feel strong about their identity. It's hard to understand because it changes a lot. How am I doing on time? I won't go into this piece if I'm about to be cut off.
I think you're fine. We're only about 10 minutes in.
Cool. All right. For us academics, we can complicate things. We haven't spent a lot of time delineating and getting information out about ethnic identity. And it is very challenging. Initially, It was thought that as, for example, I became more acculturated, my tribal identification would go down. Now what we know is that that's not the case. How connected you are to American culture does not define how connected you are to tribal culture. They're independent. So one can't make assumptions from one to the other. And that's important for us as practitioners at the individual, family, and community level. Within families, you'll have different levels of ethnic identity. And so, again, you just can't predict. And again, that's where we're useful in our ability to be humble and our ability to listen to people's stories and see where they're coming from versus opposing what we think they are. So that's what makes it difficult. No longer a lineal model. Again, you can't predict. Second challenge is for academics or the unit changes. Ethnic identity can vary across generations, and it can vary within the individual. How my ethnic identity shifted as I got older. And then that's a picture of my mother, my grandmother, and then my great-grandmother that passed away when she was really young. And so, all of these can change across. And then, as I mentioned, within an individual person. My kids are growing up with a much stronger sense of what it is to be Cherokee. And then the third challenge is definition and research. People have often used the same things. They've referenced it as ethnic identity, acculturation, cultural identification. And those are just some pictures to represent. And those are wild onions, which are on my mind right now because it's wild onion season. But anyway, people have used these different things to mean the same concept in research, and it just isn't. So here's highlighted again. We use ethnic identity, we use acculturation interchangeably, but they assess different things. One good way that I use another measure to get into this topic that isn't threatening is the cultural identification scale. And they just asked some questions when you were growing up. Did you, live this kind of life? Did you live what you would say would be a native way, a white way? And you can put other groups in there because it's not just white, it's not just native. And that can open the door where people can yeah. And you can look at that, which is a much shorter measure, and say, oh, okay, I see here that your family lived, because it asks about the self and the family and what you want for the future, that you lived a native way. What was that like? What did it include? And they'll start to tell the story, and you can get a sense of activities that they did. You can get a sense of where they're at in terms of connection. And then you can open the door and get more in-depth about the ethnic identity. And it has powerful predictions for who they may want to see, where they're at in their struggles. The people that tend to struggle the most on an urban American Indian identity scale are people that are marginal. They don't quite fit with the white culture, for example, and they don't quite know where they fit with their tribal culture. So they're marginalized and much more, in terms of the studies that I've seen, much more likely to have depression and those types of issues. And so it's something to work with. It's something to be aware of, and it can push you beyond just checking the box and making assumptions based on that. That was all I was going to go over. And there's another measure up there that's used, and you can adapt that one to different groups, different ethnic groups. Ta-da!
Thank you. All right, Dallas, are you ready? You're up.
Okay, thank you. So I wanted to kind of pick up where Dr. Byers left off, and I don't mean for this to be a very Cherokee-focused conversation, but the both of us are Cherokee tribal members, and so that's kind of where at least my most knowledge is about tribes. I wanted to add that including that most of us are not 100% Native American, those of us who identify as Native Americans, a lot of us, almost all of us, are some combination of American Indian or tribal identity diluted or blended with some other racial or ethnic heritage. So I don't know how many people realize that there's a lot of diversity even within tribes, a lot of racial diversity within tribes. There are tribal members who absolutely do not look like what you think of as a tribal member. So I wanted to share with you this report I found about, that's not the right one. That's another one I was going to share with you, but let's start with this other one first. Let me put it in there. Okay, this is a report that's available online right now. It's from Oklahoma Works or Workforce Oklahoma, something to that effect. And it highlights the racial diversity within the reservation of the Cherokee Nation. And if you go to the second page, you can see the number of people who live within the 14 counties that make up the Cherokee Nation Reservation. And if you keep scrolling on down, you can see the percent of those people who are members of the Cherokee Nation itself. But then on page 3, the Cherokee Nation population broken down by race and ethnicity begins to get pretty interesting. I don't know exactly how accurate this information is because there's a lot of misidentification of racial identity in every collection of demographic information out there. Which it's especially dangerous for tribal members when it comes to mortality rates and morbidity rates, because people don't always identify us as Native American people because they look at us to make the determination. And that is a faulty way to decide whether or not a person is American Indian. Many of us do not look like traditional American Indian stereotypes. This report says that 63.6% of Cherokee Nation citizens identify themselves as white. And I understand this to be true in my experience. If you don't look like you're a Native American person, people look at you weird if you identify as a Native American person on a form or some kind of documents. So if you look white, it's easier just to say you're white because that causes less of a stir. Also, there's a lot of pushback against people who are not enrolled in the tribe, claiming to be Cherokee Nation members or of Cherokee Nation or something like that. It's very complicated and sticky because there are legitimately a lot of people who were not included in the original Dawes rolls, where they made a list of the Cherokee people about 150 years ago and assigned them a blood quantum based on just what they looked like. There are people who didn't show up to get added to that role, and that means it's impossible now for them to become members of the tribe, even if they are legitimately descended from the tribe. It's just a real messy situation. But I wanted to also say that there are a lot of people who are members of tribes who are Black or African American or African in their origin. They could have, well, I'll just say this, they were likely the descendants of people who were enslaved a long time ago. And there was a time whenever members of the Cherokee Nation, the very wealthiest members of the Cherokee Nation, were slaveholders as well. Not a lot of Cherokee tribal members were slaveholders. It was only actually mostly those who were of mixed blood. They were the children of those who were intermarried between members of the Cherokee Nation and the Europeans who came over in boats. So they were mixed breeds. They were fluent in English and likely in Cherokee as well. So they pretty much existed in both cultures. Those folks were more likely to become slaveholders because they were trying to become more of what the settlers or the colonists were, because they felt like that would take pressure off to be moved away from their homelands. So there were some Cherokees who owned slaves. At the end of the Civil War, the Cherokee Nation was forced to sign a treaty with the United States of America because the Cherokee Nation sided with the South, which, as you know, was the losing team. The Cherokee Nation had sided with the South, at least in some part, and so they were forced to sign a treaty, which was not always great. But in that treaty, it says that the formerly enslaved people who were enslaved by Cherokee Nation tribal members are now to be given full membership into the tribe and full benefits of that membership for them and their descendants. And that stuck for a while. But then there was a time in the early 20th century when tribes sort of faded away a little bit. They had been diminished a lot by several federal policies that impacted us negatively, including, relocation programs, all different kinds of ways that they tried to acculturate Cherokee people and Native people across the country into the dominant culture. And so tribes had lost a lot of their authority. But in the mid 1970s, the Self-Determination Act, it was an Education and Self-Determination Act, was signed into law, which allowed the tribes to reconstitute themselves and become sovereign in their identities again. They had never lost their sovereignty, they had just lost the respect for their sovereignty. That changed in the mid 1970s, and they began to serve their people in ways that we can recognize now through health services, social service programs, and so forth. It was during that time that many tribes rewrote their constitutions, including the Cherokee Nation. And during that rewrite of the Constitution, they added some language that said to be a member of the Cherokee Nation, you must be a member by blood. So that was intended to exclude those who were given membership through that treaty of 1866. So it was a racist policy. Whether any Cherokees will say that, it's iffy. A lot of people don't like to be called racist when they do racist things, but the fact is that was a racist policy adopted by many Cherokee people and still supported by a lot of Cherokee people. And I can understand where they're coming from. A lot of people will say, you can't be a member of our family if you're not a blood member of our family, meaning you have genetic history with us. We share genes in common because we're all one family. But that isn't fair, really, especially after that treaty was signed. So in the mid 1970s, they excluded the formerly enslaved people's descendants from membership. They're called freedmen, Cherokee freedmen. But just recently, just a few weeks ago, the Cherokee Nation reversed itself and took out the Supreme Court of the Cherokee Nation required they remove the words by blood from every document of the Cherokee Nation, including the Constitution. So now the descendants of the freedmen are considered full members, and they have all the rights of membership, voting, healthcare, education, and everything that they should have had all along. It seems like I'm frozen. Can you all hear me? If you can, will you gesture or say something into the chat?
You're not.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So I'm very proud of the Cherokee Nation at this point for changing that racist policy to be more fair and just to the freedmen who are members of the Cherokee Nation. There are also Cherokee Nation tribal members who are Cherokee by blood, who are Black or Mexican or Guatemalan. There are many, many Cherokees who one side of their family is Cherokee and the other side of their family is from somewhere else on the planet. And so there's a lot of diversity within the Cherokee Nation, but also within all the tribes. I want to also remind everyone that there are 38 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma right now. And of those, almost none of them started in Oklahoma. I think 37 of those 38 tribes were forcibly removed to Indian territory or unorganized lands at some point before Oklahoma's statehood. The federal government was famous for just moving tribal people away from their homelands. So they would lose their burial sites, they would lose their sacred grounds, they would lose the land that they had been accustomed to hunting on and farming and just existing on. And they were moved to Oklahoma, which the federal government thought wasn't really worth much. It was just, prairie, kind of rolling hills, nothing special. And so it required a whole new way of life for a lot of tribal peoples, but certainly those who had been nomadic, and they were people who would follow their the game that they hunted across the continent between the seasons. Putting them on a reservation in Oklahoma was pretty tough. So another thing the federal government did when they relocated those tribes to Oklahoma is they sometimes put tribes which had been rivals historically together, like the Cheyenne Arapaho. And they did that as a form of, trolling, kind of. They were punishing tribes, or they're being just mean to tribes, or they thought they could keep them fighting amongst themselves and that would keep them from fighting against the United States. And it's a really awful thing that they've done to many tribes historically, which is why you might find some dysfunction in tribes that comes from that historical and generational trauma and grief. So a lot of people experience historical trauma and grief and don't even understand it. They don't even know where it's coming from, and they can't tell you the history of their tribe. One of the first steps in healing that historical trauma and grief is helping understand the tribal history in an honest way and letting people tell it for themselves after they understand it. We need to go through a lot of that healing. But that's not the point of today's talk. Today we're talking about diversity, and there's a lot more diversity than just racial and ethnic diversity within tribes. There, of course, tribal people age at the same rate as other people. So we have young people and people who are older. We have people with all various disabilities, all various kinds of abilities. I'm sorry, I should have called it various abilities, not disabilities. You feel free to check me if I say things like that. So every kind of diversity there is in the everyday American culture, you'll find within tribal cultures as well. And the thing is, they just might have some that's a little bit more specific according to their tribe. I think Dr. Byers covered it well when she talked about how tribes are all different. The 38 sovereign tribes in Oklahoma are distinct. They're different. They're as different as European countries are different from each other, but they're neighbors. And there may be things they agree on. Probably protecting tribal sovereignty is one. So you might find a lot of agreement when it comes to that, but you'll find a lot of disagreement when it comes to other topics, such as gaming rights, such as hunting, fishing rights, such as membership, things like that. If you know one tribe, you know one tribe. There are around 600 others that you don't know. They're all different, and it's impossible to group them all together and say, this is how Native people think, or this is what Native people do. And we do that, even members of tribes, we say those kinds of things, like we think this is Native humor or whatever, and it is, but it's not maybe humor that all Natives experience or appreciate. And then one more thing I'll say, there's a lot of people, a lot of us say things about our food, like Indian tacos is one of the favorite things. And if you go out into the Southwest United States, you're gonna hear it's Navajo tacos. The thing is, fried bread is not traditional food from tribal origins. That's not what we ate, 300 years ago, 600 years ago. We made food out of the provisions we were given when we were taken from the place where we could capture our own food. So commodities, we got food distribution, we got commodities. It was white flour, it was lard, it was sugar. It wasn't stuff we were used to eating, but we made do with what we had. We found something we could make out of it. And we've adopted it as cultural, but it's not historically cultural. So it's important to know the distinction, I think, between what is current culture and what is historic culture. And we need to respect those things. And it's hard sometimes for members of tribes to do that. I didn't know that there was a difference between what is currently cultural and what is historically cultural. I didn't realize that my tribe is a specific type of art that's distinct from other tribes, even from tribes who originated in the southeastern United States like mine did. The Muskogee Creek Nation, the Choctaw Nation, Seminoles, they were all neighbors, and they all sometimes fight and sometimes got along. And we have similar cultures, but they're also distinct, much different. So I hope that gives you just a little bit more insight into tribes and tribal diversity. And I'm available to answer any questions or engage in any conversation you like until our time is up.
Thank you, Dallas. I just want to remind everyone, I've put the survey in the chat. If you need to get CEUs, make sure you do that today.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Byers or for me?
I feel like I have so many, but I'm going to be in the American Indian social reports, American Indian, so I feel like most of them will get answered there. But recently, I listened to a podcast because I'm a tribal member of Muskogee Creek Nation. Blood quantum wise, I'm more Cherokee, but I went with the lineage side of Creek Nation. So anyways, with that, I was listening to a podcast talking about it's a more of a political thing because of where you get to vote, and it's like a land within a land. And so the disenfranchisement of American Indians with mass incarceration and stuff like that, and the blood quantum, it makes it harder for us to vote on what happens within our sovereign nations. And so I don't really know what my question is with that, besides like what goes into that, like on the macro level, because that's a social work thing I like. So I don't know.
So there's a couple points I'd like to make. I'll make a couple points based on what you started with there. being a member of a tribe is not a racial identity. It's a political identity, right? So we're citizens of nations. We're not races. It's impossible to categorize us or American Indians of any tribe as a distinct race. It's a political affiliation, and that's why the tribe's sovereignty matters. And that's why tribal members have different rights often than non-tribal members, because they are literally citizens of two nations. Their tribal nation is a dependent sovereign nation, according to the United States Supreme Court, that, if in my opinion, elevates it to a status just slightly higher than that of the states. States are not nations. They're dependent on the federal government as well. They're part of the federation. Tribes are not. They're dependent on the federal government because tribes are not allowed to raise armies. They're not allowed to print currency. But in every other way, they're sovereign nations. The other issue you brought up was blood quantum. Blood quantum is pretty controversial. A lot of people who are of higher blood quantum, the highest you can be is a 4/4, or 4/4, which is full blood. Blood quantum is fake. It is based only on a person looking at a person and determining whether or not they're some percentage American Indian. And it happened when Commissioner Dawes rode up into Oklahoma on his horse and started looking at people and saying, you're full blood, you're half, you're a quarter. Oh, you're black, you're not any. And all of that is crazy. I'm sorry for using that word, I shouldn't have. It is inappropriate to look at someone and determine their percentage of blood quantum. However, that was the best documentation of who was a member of the tribe at any point since moving to Oklahoma. So the Cherokee Nation and other tribes adopted those roles as their initial list of membership. And then everyone who wants to become a member next has to trace their lineage back to an original Dawes sign-up person. Yeah, race is a social construct, just like gender.
I have a question. With the new Secretary of Interior, Deborah Holland, she's a part of the, over even like the BIA. Do you think any kind of maybe address like blood quantum issues, or what do you think about that?
First, I want to say I'm very excited that Deb Holland is now in charge. It's about time that someone is over the Department of Interior who is also under the oversight of the Department of Interior. I'm also a little bit offended that they put tribes under the Department of Interior with, parks, because we're not, I don't know how to say it. We should be under the Department of State, in my opinion, but whatever. I don't think Deb Holland will address blood quantum because that's not really her purview as a representative of the federal government. Blood quantum should be now handled by each tribe because that's what they use to determine tribal membership many times. And I think that is now under the tribe's purview. I don't think the federal government has any power to impact blood quantum unless it goes through like a Supreme Court case or some lawsuit. What I'm really excited about with Deb Holland being in charge is I think that she's going to protect tribes from any kind of plunder that the federal government might want to abuse them with. I think she'll protect tribes from like radioactive waste being dumped on sovereign land, especially in the Southwest. The tribes out in Utah and the Four Corners region, they're putting up with a lot of contamination because the United States dumps its nuclear waste on land that drains into tribal land, and a lot of their water is ruined now for those reasons. And I think Deb Holland will protect tribes from that. I think she will also protect the environment on behalf of tribes. Tribes are historically protectors of the environment and stewards of the environment, and I think that she will support those same issues on behalf of tribes, which will be controversial. People who are in the petroleum industry are not going to like that, but I think it's time that we start looking after the environment more than we look after our pocketbooks. I'm not sure what else she'll do, but I'm sure it's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. Anybody else? We have like 10 minutes left. You want to know about the Center for Tribal Social Work while we're here? Okay. We started the Center for Tribal Social Work at OU. We started it in Tulsa to be a place where We can house all of our activities that recruit Native students, Native American tribal members as students, but also a place where we can partner with tribes to develop and implement workforce development programs or training programs, and any kind of thing that we can do to help tribes. And it all started because I was working with a lady from the Bureau of Indian Affairs called Rita Hart, and Rita's a social worker, and so am I. And she had come to a presentation that Haruv was giving in 2017, and they were talking about social simulation. And Rita met with me afterward and said, that simulation stuff is really cool. Wouldn't it be cool if tribes had access to that for their training? And I said, well, let's just make it happen. So we did. We started inviting tribes to bring their expertise to join with the resources of the university to develop training for their own employees, not just students, but current employees. So we had a very successful partnership that lasted a couple of years, and we've expanded it and we've changed it around a little bit. And now we're doing specific tribal workforce development and training programs. So we'll go to the tribe and visit with them. We'll do some focus groups and some interviews, and we'll develop tribal training plans for their workers. And then we'll ask the tribe to help train their own employees. We will do a lot of the, helping them develop the PowerPoints, or we may help develop an evaluation, things like that. We've started working in the area of child welfare first, because that's where a lot of our expertise is. And that's where a lot of resources are right now. So we're starting there, but we're hoping to expand into all different sorts of areas like behavioral health, early care and education, general child welfare. Right now, we're still building the webpage for the Center for Tribal Social Work. It was supposed to be done at the end of March, and it's still working a little. We do have a Facebook page that I'm supposed to be posting things to, but I often forget. So you can go there and look at it, but there's not a lot to see just now. We're going to have a GRA. Right now, Sarah Lynn O'Donnell is the GRA, and she takes care of everything we do for us. We're going to have one starting in the fall, hopefully, who will just really handle all of our social media stuff and things like that. If you want to know more about the Center for Tribal Social Work, you can hang out for a little while and we'll get something on the website soon, or you can email me and I'll share with you whatever I've got. Right now, we're funded by 4 different funding organizations at about $1.6 million that lasts until 2024. It fades out a little bit in 2023, but we'll be applying for more funding. We have a scholarship program. It's called Way Up. It's for students who agree to work in tribal child welfare upon graduation. They can apply to Way Up. It's called Workforce Excellence Initiative University Partnership. I know it doesn't mean anything, but it does sort of. We're giving essentially full rides to those students who agree to go work in tribal child welfare, 1 year of employment for every 1 year of education after they graduate. So I think it's a great deal. You get an education for free and you got a job guaranteed for you when you get out. Can't beat that. So there are several students taking advantage of that opportunity. And then other stuff we do, the other funds we receive are to support us working with tribes on training projects. So right now we have 2 employees. I'm the director, and Courtney Bolt, if you don't know her, you should meet her. She's fantastic. She's the program manager, and the 2 of us do everything with the strong support of our able GRA, Sarah Lynn O'Donnell. I think that's all I have. Oh, what macro level tribal careers do you find social work students enjoy? I don't know how much they enjoy it, but I think there's a lot of work to be done on the macro level, and students sometimes don't know how to find those jobs because they're out there searching for social work jobs. And those macro level jobs are not called social worker. They're called administrator, director, policy analyst, things like that. You just kind of have to go out there and get creative. And then you're going to find that they're recruiting people with a public administration or a business degree or even an education degree. And it's going to be on you to go out there and explain to them that your education qualifies you to do this kind of work. I've had to go advocate for social workers in non-social work type roles, but it's stuff that you're absolutely trained to do as part of our program. We teach you how to be an advocate. We teach you to look at policy, analyze it, and recommend improvements to it. We teach you how to look at how big decisions impact small things and how everyday people are affected by policies at the federal, state, and local levels. There's so much good work to be done at the macro level in combination with micro, direct practice stuff that I really hope that you all will go off into that. And if you want to talk with me more about macro stuff, because that's where my heart is, because I never learned the micro stuff. It's important and we're the best at it, but I'm not. You're free to email me. We'll set up a Zoom. We'll talk about it. All right, anybody else? We have 5 more minutes and then you're gonna make me leave. I can just start calling names. You've got names on your pictures there. No? Okay, then I think I'm finished. Thank you for having me here today. Thank you for coming to this session. I think Dr. Byers would say the same thing. We both appreciate your time and attention.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.